kind of found my path that way. And I remember thinking, this is madness. Like, I'm no longer the anxious, depressed mess that I was, and therefore the changes that I've made have been for the best. Non-violence means being kind to everyone.
Including yourself. I forget about that one. Today we are shifting with Shelley Henkle, multidiscipline practitioner at Rise Your Shakti in Melbourne. And we are actually in the studio following a lovely session this morning. Thank you so much, Shelley, where we did just a little bit of settling in to become present with ourselves before we have this conversation, which I'm just so excited about. I met Shelley through a mutual friend who recognized that our individual transformation journeys were aligned in many ways and thought, you two need to meet. And so thank you, Sarah, wise woman that you are. And welcome, Shelley.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for thinking of me to come onto this podcast and share my stories of shifting and transforming.
Absolutely. I'm so pleased that I got you to agree to this, because we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is well-being practices. And these are areas in which you are trained. Energetic healing, you've got certifications in that, and you're going to tell us more about it, as well as somatic-based and trauma-informed and responsive yoga therapy,
yes.
Which, my gosh, we could all use a little bit of that as far as I'm concerned. And then we're going to talk a little bit about spinal flow and your work as a Reiki practitioner. So for some of the listeners, this may be new information for you. But I'm super excited to dive more deeply into the concept of working with our energy to promote our own well-being. And your work focuses right on into that space where many people don't spend as much time as they might, which I like to call in time.
Yes, I, Elizabeth, have made in time my business. And this is potentially because I knew it was essential for me to spend as much time in the space of quiet and regeneration as possible for my own well-being and recovery, really. Mm. So just briefly, I call it my former life, like someone who's transitioned, and I think I have. In my former life, I was anxious and depressed. I was constantly experiencing what I've considered betrayal by my own body. So I felt like my body hijacked me into sudden bursts of panic, anger, sadness, and they were beyond my control and certainly having a significant impact on my life.
Yeah.
My transformation is, in a sentence, is that I just decided, and I'll come to reasons why more a bit later, but I quit my job in aviation and I trained in various modalities of yoga. I'm a yoga facilitator. I've also trained in yin yoga, kids yoga. I then went on to do, as you mentioned, somatic-based, trauma-informed and responsive yoga. Then I moved into healing and trained in several modalities there. I did this largely to prioritize the regulation of my own nervous system and to help others on the journey of wellness.
It's fantastic. And you're touching on this, how do we keep ourselves within our window of tolerance?
Absolutely. So the key to all of my learnings is the nervous system. And I didn't realize that at the onset. This is really, in a way, I've done my learning backwards, and I'll explain that a bit later too. But I was aware and really not aware at all at the same time that stress was the significant impact for me. And I've come to realize that stress is the number one contributor to disease. So when we're talking about the nervous system, and I think we'll keep coming back to that today, the regulation of the nervous system, it's imperative. Mm-hmm. And so many people don't understand this at all.
Yeah.
And they really have no idea about the battle that we face with stress, and stress being the common enemy. It is certainly the major enemy to the nervous system.
And for me, yes, you're so right. And I think that concept is very tangible for most people. Oh, I'm stressed. Oh, stress has got me. Yeah, I'm super stressed. I don't have any time. All these statements that people make without really grasping onto you're the one doing it.
Yeah.
We're doing it to ourselves.
Yes.
Because we've bought into the framework.
Totally.
And so it's almost like a badge of honor to be incredibly stressed and to have a very full calendar and to, oh gosh, I'd love to catch up with you, but I don't have any time, because that makes me important. And I think that for me, that's a huge telltale sign. If somebody needs to do some work, and that was for me, if I'm so busy, I have to do some work. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I'm not sure who it was the quote is by, but it's something like, everyone needs to find 15 minutes to prioritize their mental health. So, everyone needs to meditate for 15 minutes a day. And for those who say they're too busy to do that, they need an hour.
That's right. So, I know about that somewhere. I think it's in an article on my LinkedIn called Playing with Time. And I did find the guy who said it. And yes, exactly. If you say you have no time, twice for you. Mm-hmm. So it's fantastic, because once you find that time, all of a sudden you have more, and it's really, really interesting. And we're gonna dive right into this. But before I ask you to take the mic and give us the gift of sharing really deeply about your personal transformation, which sounds really remarkable, going from aviation to yoga, and then how that changed your life and brought you to create Rise Your Shakti, which is fantastic. I like to play a game with my guests. Are you willing to play a game?
I am.
Excellent. So I like to play a game that I started a number of years ago. I couldn't find a way to monetize it, and so we just play for fun. And it's called, What's Your Current First World Problem?
Okay.
Yeah. What's your current first world problem?
I think a lot of us deal badly with the stress that comes from being the car. And so
with being
in the car. So getting from A to B. I still think my brain thinks it's 1985.
Oh.
And I haven't determined that everywhere I go may take an extra 15 minutes. And even though I can leave the house incredibly regulated and feeling calm, there is things that happen that just throw you, don't they? And it throws you out of your window. So I feel like time constraints, getting from A to B, getting the kids from here to there, there's always this pressure to push, pressure to make it on time constraints. And these are always challenging when one gets in the car and suddenly there's roadworks at the end of your very street. So, being places on time, which is in itself ridiculous, because we're all going to make it to where we have to be eventually. And once again, this drive, this push, this competition, and I think this is where we lose our sense of calm. This capitalist society in which we live in, which dictates where we have to be and what we have to do constantly, and trying to remind yourself constantly to take those deep breaths in the car, to take a big sigh, to hum, and to remind yourself that the roadworks at the end of the end of the street should not really be a whole reason to shift your equilibrium for the day.
I agree with you 100%. And if you're in 1985, you've got a lot of really peppy music to listen to.
Synthesized.
Wham! I mean, just cheer up. So I love that you talked about time constraints, because I'm going to tell you what my first world problem is right now, and it's very gluttonous. I have perhaps a tiny bit too much free time right now, and I must make myself focus and complete things that I begin. And I'm hoping that you can maybe help me with that today in our chat, because I'm not doing paid work at the moment. However, I have a number of passion projects that I'm doing, and I don't have anybody doing what you just said, telling me I have to be somewhere at a certain time. I don't have any structure unless I do it myself. And so how might we, be grateful for having this space, but also use it wisely?
Absolutely. I think that must be, a big shock for you.
It is a little bit.
To have free time.
It's crazy, because I, like you, 2 children and always a full-time job, and try and make time for the people that I love in my family who are all over the world. So time zones, and, always feeling like, am I going to squeeze it in? And that I don't have any of that.
Yeah. I think when we're faced with free time, and I'm sure, knowing you, Elizabeth, that you're filling your time wisely, and that there's many projects you're engaged in, and that you're prioritizing your health. So I'm sure that there's hours of the day that you can feel just being good to yourself. But then there's those times outside of that when you're not quite sure what to do with yourself. And you might have in your healthy mind platter, that might be just the time when we just be. We don't have a focus.
Downtime.
We just kind of let ourselves do whatever it is and let our minds wander. I think society has pushed onto us the concept that is unacceptable. That clashes with our sense of value, with our sense of worth. And if we're not filling all that space in our day, then potentially thoughts can creep in saying, well, are you being good enough? Are you worthy? Why aren't you ticking this box and ticking that box? And that's something we need to work on. That inner critic saying, be more, achieve more, do more. That's the voice that needs to be quietened. And that's a big challenge.
It's my current challenge.
Yeah.
So thank you, because it's very easy to self-flagellate and
Yes.
get down on if you are functioning a little outside the general framework. I've always been in corporate, going for those, jobby job 9 to 5 thing. And those hours, I mean, of course, yes, I love the yoga. I love the meditation. I'll go for a walk. I use those weight parks that are out there
Love them.
I know, they're so good. And that's a few hours, and how indulgent. And it's fantastic. It's like I'm on a holiday. And then I'm doing this, which is fantastic, meeting all these great people. But there are more hours than effort that I've got to do, and I can be lethargic. And so maybe as we go along, you'll give me a few tips that I can incorporate into my life to get me off my own bum. So I'm always so interested in motivation. I mean, we're talking about motivation and what motivates other people, because it does work into when I am in the workplace. I need to know what motivates people to do the change that the organization is after. And I did tease us earlier that you're going to share your personal story. So first of all, thank you for what you're about to share. I know it's quite personal. People will love to hear how it links to your educational pursuits, as well as the businesswoman that you've morphed into today.
Sure. So as I said, my story kind of works backwards in a strange way. So I had, as mentioned, been living with anxiety and depression for quite some time, for many years. And I was actually taking antidepressants, and I was in a place, I'd been to far darker places before, but I was kind of in a leveled out, low frequency, long state of kind of semi-darkness. And this was 2.5 years ago when I had a full-blown spiritual awakening, and I was certainly not something I was expecting nor working towards. I had been, in fact, a very staunch atheist for many years. I'd been in talk therapy. As I said, I was medicated. I was diagnosed with complex trauma. And I remember speaking to the psychiatrist at one point and saying, I feel like when I'm tripped into severe states of stress, I have what I labeled soul shakes. And looking back now, that was probably the most highly intuitive thing I'd said in years. And I think what needs to be said here is when you're living in a place of chronic stress, we are living in fight or flight, and that is survival. So we're in survival. So I wasn't connected to my inner world. I don't know that you can be when you've been living in an extended period of survival. So to recognize my soul shaking was actually highly intuitive and amazing at the time.
What is that? Can you describe?
Yeah, so I explained it to the psych, and it was kind of like a deep shake, and it was physical. So it would kind of come from my very center, almost my solar plexus, and just kind of have me in these sort of fits, like I'd be convulsing quite hard. And I explained this to the doctor, and anyway, I left with my diagnosis, and I was medicated, and that was how I existed for quite some time. 2.5 years ago, the Ukraine war had broken out, and as an empath, I generally avoid the news. I find it extremely upsetting and very hard to shake off and regulate my nervous system after watching. So I was avoiding it largely as usual, but it was the Ukraine war. There was climate change all over the media, and we were witnessing a lot of Grace Tame and Brittany Higgins's plights, and I couldn't quite escape all of that. And I remember feeling so miserable, and a friend of mine had a strange dream about me, and she said, "Have you meditated lately?" I said, "God, not for years." And she said, "Well, you need to meditate, and it's a full moon, you should meditate." I thought, that's odd. I thought, you know what, that's exactly what I need. Why haven't I been doing anything like that for such a long time? So I went outside, I sat under the full moon. Now, I should have probably mentioned this prior. I'd been having strange shakes leading up to it for a couple of months. So different to the soul shake in that it was a shake that was in my head. And I noticed it when I'd come back from work trips, and I was really not satisfied or particularly happy in my job. And I'd have to leave town for my work, leave my kids, which was highly stressful for me. Both of my children neurodivergent. And I started having these strange shakes in the head. I'd freaked out so much about them, I booked myself into the doctor. I'd filmed them on camera, and I decided I probably had MS or Parkinson's.
Right.
So,
just for everyone, she doesn't.
No, but I was very, very worried. And so we go back to the day of the full moon. I sat under the full moon, cross-legged in a meditation position for the first time in a very long time. And these shakes started straight away. And I thought, you know, I was fearful, but I thought, let's just, instead of tripping straight into fear, just sit with it and work out what it is. So I realized it was not a standard shake. It was like a two breaths. Two breaths. And I was smart enough to realize that that was not indicative of some illness, and that they felt to me energetic. And I've had enough experience in the past to know that this is that made sense to me. And I thought, all right, this is kind of connected to the soul shake somehow. This is your body releasing something unpleasant that's locked in there. The shakes turned into something more. My whole body started moving, flailing, shaking, convulsing, and then I experienced an energetic sensation from the base of my spine rise up through the top of my head, and I felt like I was lifted up to the sky, and I had a very significant moment of unity and love. Unity, divinity, love. I knew it was an extremely feminine sense, a feminine presence. I had no idea what it was other than that. And then I basically, and this is where I'm going to go real woo-woo on you, and this is often where I lose for you people, and that's okay because I'm committed to this journey. I had like a conversation with what I thought was the moon, and it wasn't like a strange foreign voice. It was just a voice telling me, and it was a series of instructions and it was kind of like an instant download. Like I just knew, I didn't even really need to hear the voice. And it was, this is what you need to do to change your life in order to attain personal happiness. And this is the important part. I knew it was a personal thing. It wasn't, this is what the whole world needs to do. This was directly for me. So I realized looking back now that that was me connecting to my higher self, and that wasn't the moon speaking to me. The moon is a representation of the great goddess in my beliefs, but that was me connecting to my higher self, which I'd severed myself from. It was me reconnecting to my soul and me almost downloading all the stuff that I'd been pushing down inside of me and not allowing myself to understand. And I was smart enough to realize that if I was involuntarily moving under the moonlight in the garden and getting messages from the divine, I should probably take them. Maybe not tell everyone immediately.
But now you can just broadcast it.
That's right. Now I'm really brave.
Excellent.
Just go to bed, ponder on it, wake up in the morning, and maybe take this stuff seriously.
Shelley Henkle, everyone.
That's me. So this is what happened. It was incredible. I told my mother the next day. She looked at me with severe doubt in her eyes. we had a family gathering, and there was like, I think maybe 20 of my family friends, and I told them. And as I ate my salad, because one of the things for me was not to eat meat again, and I had spent many years as a vegetarian and slipped out of that, went straight back into that. Everyone looked at me like I was insane. My friends started looking at me in a way that they'd never looked at me before, sort of like in the eyes, a vague sense of, you've gone mad. And I pushed through it, and I still had these involuntary movements every day. And it took me 2 weeks of Googling, of course, to try and find out what on earth was going on for me. And I found the word Kundalini. So a Kundalini awakening is generally something that happens after a process, and it's usually a committed journey of yoga and a commitment to a certain lifestyle and activities, pranayama, breathing techniques, asana, and a variety of other things. And then you may come to this position where you might stir your Kundalini awake. There's also another way it can happen, which is spontaneous, and that is generally in a response to trauma, or it can sometimes be hallucinogens, which I'd just like to state for the record I'd had none of. And there's various other ways that this process can happen without all the prior work, and it's happening quite often in our society now. And my take on that is that some of us need to be woken up. Some of us, it's due to our trauma, but I think some of us need to be woken, to fight the cause, which is that we all really need to wake up, smell the roses, and work out the way we're living is not congruent to humanity.
Well, it's may I add
Sure,
to that? I think it's the structures that we have formed were created for the cave, the farm, and the factory, and none of those are in use these days, right? I mean, the farm a little bit, but we're really moving away from, farming is a whole nother topic for another day. But the structures, the factory, you have to be on site to create the widgets, right? And so that's why people were on site. Now we have all these other ways in order to bring out the talent that we have inside of us. And it needn't be in the same place at the same time unless we're gathering for purpose. So the structures that we've developed is a control mechanism that people are pushing back against. They don't wish to be controlled. And with this stress factor and the lack of time that people perceive in their life, we're not in our window of tolerance. And so therefore, there's no way to be as creative and innovative as we have potential to be.
Sure.
We are shooting ourselves in the foot with constantly forcing people to get into a certain structure. So my concept with these conversations, what I'm trying to develop is an idea of how might we build a structure where all the time for everyone, we are incorporating that healthy mind platter all the time, not as a holiday where we go off for a well-being holiday and then we come back and lose all of that.
Yeah.
So this is sort of, I think we're on the same wave a little bit. And you mentioned something in what you were saying that you experienced with all the people in your family were around you when you diverted from the path that you had been on, and it was shocking for them, and you weren't experiencing a lot of support. But you said, but I pushed through that.
Yes.
So I'm curious, that sounds like effort, and that sounds like stress in itself. So how do we push through? We're traumatized ourselves, perhaps. We're having a difficult time. We see a different path, and then we have no support.
Yeah, look, I think fortunately for me, my spiritual awakening gave me the strength to understand that although everyone looked at me as if I was mad, there was no, and sometimes I can still be drawn over to seeing myself through their eyes and I glimpse madness. But when I'm actually looking from my own self, from my own inner world, I know with irrefutably that I'm right. It's like a DNA download. But that is not afforded to each individual, and I'm extremely lucky for that. So pushing through, you have to dig your heels down deep. And I also think that there's safety knowing that intuitively deep down, we know what's right and what's wrong for us. So if we could just lock into everyone and make them see that all of us collectively as humans, we need to prioritize our wellness. And I think deep down, everyone knows that. It's just how we can hook in and make them see too. So I see what you're saying. It's not easy to push on if you're feeling unsupported and like the world is against you because you're the only one trying to make this great change. I think staying strong to your beliefs, knowing that what you've been doing and how you've been living hasn't been serving you, and just holding on to that and thinking, I know I can do this. And there's always sacrifices to be made when we're making such dramatic change. But I think if I was to say anything in terms of this, the theme of your podcast is that embrace change. Life is not meant to be one of the same stories. It's meant to shift and change. And we are meant to grow. And all of that means being brave enough to jump into something new.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so it was helpful for you to have this clear sign, right? Not everybody.
That's
and you
right.
made me think of Selene, the moon goddess, coming to you, talking to you. And I would concur with you that this was actually yourself. This is you were crying from the inside.
Correct.
To please become whole.
Yes.
And so that's fantastic. So you've mentioned to me in other conversations that once you recognize this for yourself and you had the strength to just stand up and say, this is what I'm doing, regardless of pushback from anyone around me. And I'm sure you found supporters as well.
Well, I found supporters in the sense that I became so much happier and people could see that. So that sort of applied to me personally more to my friends who were like, wow, she's never been so whole and so together and so happy. My parents were like, who's going to pay the bills? Why have you left the job? Oh my God. And I could feel their stress coming out of them. So, it was coming from both sides, but I think you have to prove yourself in that way. So then you have to be like, all right, I'm just going to stick to it. And surely they'll see that I'm no longer the anxious, depressed mess that I was, and therefore the changes that I've made have been for the best.
Yes. And so, yes, you're talking about earlier you said your vibration's quite low.
Very low.
And and I wonder also, Western medicine, there are Western medicines that are incredibly beneficial and fantastic. And having created those, I don't think therefore means that we should leave things that work from the earth aside, right? And so there's a space for natural approaches to creating well-being, as well as what we've learned through science, right? And so you can tell me you don't wish to share about whether your transformation has allowed you to drop those?
Yeah, absolutely. So I made instant changes. There were certain things that I knew I had to do instantly. So I didn't eat meat again. I'd certainly been, we'd just sort of come out of COVID, and in COVID I'd started drinking, and I've really never been, never had an issue with that. I instantly got rid of that. When it came to the antidepressants, I was wise enough to think that is not something one just drops.
No. I've heard
the day that one has a conversation with the moon.
You get a different script
Imagine.
For that.
Totally.
Yeah.
So, no, I was very clever. I did that smart. I came off them slowly, and I was so nervous. And I remember sort of having a conversation with my higher self and being like, is this going to be okay? And there was a very distinct yes that came back to me. This will be absolutely fine. You don't need this anymore. Not to say that I didn't need it at the time. I 100% needed it at the time. And although I am advocating for people to come to heal themselves through somatic-based practices, and I'm also talk therapy and a variety of other practices, I often have had, I've had several friends come to me and say, Shelley, I'm a complete mess. The doctor said I should go on antidepressants. And I say, you should, because that might be a period, But I think that it can be a period where it will help you out of the darkness, and then you need to think about ways to reduce that if you can.
Yes. I mean, it could be that gives you the space to do the talk therapy, to
Absolutely.
go inside and start poking around. Whereas without that, you don't have the peace to do it.
Most definitely.
So, and I was about to ask you this, but you mentioned in the conversation before this one that you were moved to bring what you've been learning to other women.
Yeah. So initially I wanted my space of healing to only be for women. And I mean, I guess that's because I have lived the female experience. I can't pretend to understand the journey of a man. And quite a few of my issues from back in the day were around men. So I thought, no, I've come through a journey that I feel like I've been through the hardship and I've come out the other end. And that's when you can begin to help others. You can't help others when you're still in the thick of it. You have to have found your way out and be able to, speak about the issues with this level of clarity and also knowledge. Mm-hmm. So I determined that I would have a female-only space, but then men approached me largely for spinal flow, and I didn't turn them away. And in doing so, I realised that, of course, I was being ridiculous to think that men don't need healing and men don't need to connect to their own inner world or reconnect to their body and find a way to release stress, energetic blockages within the system. So I took on men, and I have male clients, but I've kind of geared my business in a way, and I market it in a way that is really geared towards women. Mm-hmm. So I feel like my space is largely developed for women. However, I'm more than happy to have men and help them in their journey as well.
Well, that's fantastic. And I mean, of course, we're all unique individuals, but are there any insights that you've drawn along gender lines that you care to share? I mean, some info. I'm looking always to get along better with others. And if there's anything, I'm also hetero, so that's, how can I get along better with men? I'm curious what maybe you've learned some things.
Look, I think it's still one of my learning journeys also, how to get along better with men. But it's only been the last few years where I've firmly identified myself in spiritual and ideological spaces. So I consider myself a feminist, and I consider myself a devotee of the great mother goddess Shakti. And in saying that, I just, I believe in God, goddess. God is energy, goddess. God, goddess is energy, and that is surely genderless. But if it was to be a gender, then I would say that God is a woman, because the God that I think of is a creative force, a creatrix. That's got to be female, in my opinion. In terms of men, look, I think the big problem is living under patriarchy. And, someone told me the other day that's not even real. Oh, I said, that's interesting.
Do tell.
I said, when you step outside the house into the real world, can you honestly tell me that everything you see out there, the way that our society is structured, does not serve to benefit men? Oh, he said. And I chose not to engage in really get into an argument there. But I think we can say without a doubt that the society in which we live in makes it easier for men to get along. They get a leg up. We don't have that. That's something we need to work towards changing. I don't think patriarchy serves men either. This idea that men have to be ultra masculine, the main provider, that they cannot identify their softer sides. None of this is serving either of the genders well. And gender, as you said before, hunter-gatherers. Women were hunting, the men were gathering. In Indigenous times, women were revered. Many societies were matriarchal. The women were medicine women. They were shamans. They were warriors. We've forgotten all of that. And now we've come into a space where you say we're not in the cave, we're not in the farm, we're not in the factory necessarily, and we should just be on an equal playing field. Gender is constructed now that we're out of the cave. And that we need to redefine. You know, in terms of spirituality, the belief system is that we're all born with feminine and masculine energies, and one of those is dominant, and that generally aligns with the body we've been born in, but not always.
No, not always. And that's becoming quite clear.
Yes.
And isn't it great that our children have this open and very free dialogue?
Absolutely.
I mean, I think the pendulum is kind of whacked on one side at the moment with people trying certain things on for size to see if it fits.
Sure.
And that's cool, you know, like let's experiment. Let's see what works. I mean, I'm clear on who I am, and I am a woman by birth and by growth. I've grown into being a woman. And I had a conversation with them, diverging a little bit, but I had a conversation with my about to be 16-year-old son. This is about a year and a half ago. And I was frustrated because there was a term cisgender. And I said, what's that? And he said, oh, if you're born female, you're cis female. And I said, why is my title changing? When, you know, in my mind at that time during this conversation, I was like, I'm the real thing. So why can't we just call me a woman and then create another name for something else? And so we had a very long conversation about that. But it was, I'm always interested in when I'm confronted, you know, like, why is that bothersome to me? What's the challenge?
Yeah.
So that's just an aside, but and I think I'm going to take this in a slightly different way. I mean, you've had a lot of education, and I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about that. And I'm wondering also, once you tell us that, would it be fair to say that based on the education and your personal experience, would you be an advocate for workplaces sort of further embedding their support of well-being into their model? I mean, there's a lot of verbiage about well-being, and there's an Are You Okay Day where everybody starts talking to everybody about whether they're okay or not. And well-being days, an additional couple of days that some organizations offer on top of your sick and annual leave, that you can just go, I'm having a well-being day. Supposedly you can take those without warning, and everyone supports that. And I'm not sure how well supported it is. I was considering the other day in an article about the quiet rooms that are found in many workplaces that are often not used.
Yeah.
And so I'd love an organization who would create a well-being business unit. And part of that business unit would be people who guide meditations, and we'd have a yoga room, and, you know, and we'd have classes running throughout the day, like meetings are run. And it would be part of your KPIs. How many of those sessions did you enter this week? What do you think? Are we really far away?
No, I think that's a great idea. Look, I think it's probably, maybe this is what you should be moving into, Elizabeth, creating such spaces. I think that the quiet room, I loved your article, and I think I agree in every way. The quiet room is underused, and you could be running all sorts of things in there. It's probably also, I think the first thing you'd have to do is smash the stigma. So people might still think, they think I'm going in there because I'm not coping right now, you know, and the stress is getting too much. And as you say, a high level of stress and the ability to cope with that is kind of a status thing, right?
Absolutely.
So we have to smash that first. And then I guess that would need to come from management. So maybe you could like implement, if the quiet room's already there, we could have like a new hard launch of the quiet room, and that would come with some sort of, 1 hour seminar where everyone has to attend to talk about the benefits of in time, quiet time, and then potentially give the staff, a short list of options. You might like to do breathing pranayamas in the quiet room on one day. You might like to do this 5-minute stretch routine and show them the down dog and get them to pedal their feet so they feel like they're moving their bodies around. I think it would be amazing. And I think that having someone come in, a practitioner to come in to your workplace, twice a week to run some sort of really gentle yoga class based around stress management, I think would be invaluable. And in terms of KPIs, wow, lock that in. I have a girlfriend who's just taken a job. She's in corporate, and she's taken a job that's a little less demanding than the one she was in before to prioritize her well-being. She's come to a point in her life when she's like, okay, I'm becoming unwell.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have to change, transform, shift. And she's got a job with a company that's based in wellness. And part of the KPIs are you must use the gym. So it's quite interesting that she's been told you to maintain your job here, you must do a certain amount of time.
So someone's doing this. I want to talk to this woman. I'm so excited to hear this. You have no idea. This is something that's been I've been toying with this in the back of my mind. And to your point, in every organization I've worked, yes, they'll have a massage therapist come in and people sign up, but the only people doing it are sort of the lower level. Ooh, look at this nice perk I'm getting. And they make the time and they get in there for the 15 minutes. But no one, like along the windows, if you will, is doing it. And so...
Because I bet you they perceive it as weakness.
Well, it peters out. People aren't using it, and then it dies this death. So you're not wrong. We definitely need... And I mean, when we talk about the demands on time and our available resources... To me, it just makes so much more sense to incorporate the well-being at work, because then you're not going to another place.
Absolutely.
Right? And it's right there. And when you come out, you have better ideas.
Absolutely. You
and
feel
a
better.
Healthy workforce stays around longer. I would get into the office for a different sort of atmosphere that I'm seeing if that were part of it and everyone actually used it. So you're right. We have to break through a few hurdles before we can do that. Now, I want to talk about your education, because you said that a key piece, like the ticket to your transformation, was self-study. And so we talked about self-motivation, perseverance. And so now I want to talk to you about how did you find what do you need to study? What did how did you go through all of it?
Well, I felt like the goddess kind of directed me in ways, but just listening to my intuition and my inner voice, I kind of found my path that way. And I remember thinking, this is madness. Like, you think this is right because of a strange occurrence. And I'm like, no, I'm just going to go with that. Maybe these strange occurrences are exactly what we're supposed to pay our attention to help us get to where we're supposed to be. So when the spontaneous movements that I was doing under the moon, I continued with, they never ended. And they eventually led me to yoga poses. So it's a strange, maybe we could call it a phenomena. It's part of the Kundalini process. And I learnt that later as well, that your body eventually starts putting you into shapes, and they're the shapes that your body is needing. So I started being put into certain yoga poses, and I thought, wow, this is so interesting.
When you say started being put into, what
so
do you mean? Like
so
you woke
your
up
body,
from
no,
sleep?
so I can sit. So initially it was all very strange and sporadic and a lot of shaking, and I think we need to come back to sort of fight, flight, and freeze later. So the body needs to shake. If you watch animals in the wild, they do it quite often. And that was a lot of what was happening, all this involuntary shaking. But then over time, and I'm talking months, it morphed into something more slow and less demanding on the body and quite beautiful. And then often, I surrender and my body will involuntarily start moving. And you can have certain treatments and modalities, and spinal flow comes back into a similar kind of situation where I'm helping clients tap into their parasympathetic nervous system, and their body starts to move in a wave and various other ways. That is the body's way of shifting out old energy. So eventually, when it all calmed down, and I'm assuming my nervous system began to calm down, it eventually started moving me into yoga positions. So that was the reason for me to do yoga. I thought, wow, this is a very
Very
clear sign. I'm lying here in my Cobra. No, I'm in the backyard in a headstand, which my mum used to freak out about. My mum came out one day and found me. She's like, "What are you doing?
Oh, poor woman.
It's 1 a.m. You're in a headstand in the garden." I said, "The goddess hasn't finished with me yet." She said, "Will you tell that goddess I'm still your mother and this is absurd? It's bedtime." And instantly, all the energy stopped. I was like, "Oh yeah, she listened.
Yep.
You're still the boss, Mom.
You're in charge."
Anyway, so these yoga poses, so I followed that, and also, part of the being unhappy in my former job, in my former life, was that I'd stopped using my body for work. I've done a great variety of jobs, from cardio pole dancing in female gyms to primary school teaching to aviation sales. I was even the CEO of an aviation company for a short time, to a gymnastics instructor. So what I realized in my sales job was that I was very unhappy not moving my body, and that I have a desperate need to be kinetic. So when I realized that these movements were heading me in a yoga path, it was actually made perfect sense for me. It's like, okay, we need to go back to using our body all the time for work. And I think that's really important for me, and from all the stress and the trauma that I've had, so that movement is release.
I can see that. And then, but you're talking about the spinal energy flow. And while I'm definitely a driver, I test as a driver in sort of 4 personality types, if you ascribe to that, and at work. So I'll see a problem and I want to fix it, and let's get the people together and make it happen. And why are we waiting? Sure. And so that can be very frustrating for other people who like to analyze and reflect. Also, I find that being in a constant state of do is not doing me any favors.
Absolutely.
And so I needed to, as you said before, sit with uncomfortable feelings and realizations about myself and perhaps people in my life. And someone mentioned to me yin yoga, and I'm maybe hyper flexible. I can, I have to really watch my knees doing yoga. If they say take a slight bend, definitely take the slight bend. It's not, you're not a better person because you kept your knee straight. And I had that problem. Like, I'm not doing it right if I'm not stretching the heck out of my everything. So, but the yin yoga is this nice bridge for people who say that they can't meditate. May I strongly suggest yin yoga, because you hold these poses, and not to be uncomfortable, but to relax into it. And the whole point is to release your muscles, and which is counterintuitive to a driver, and to exercise, build no pain, no gain, strength, get flexible and cut and all this stuff, right? So, but the thing about the yin yoga and the Kundalini yoga is you do these poses, you hold them, and I'm talking to the instructor, which is very amusing to me, but you hold them and then release and go into Shavasana, which is to feel all that energy flowing. And that's something when you're doing vinyasa and flowing all the time, you don't feel that.
That's right.
And the stopping is what, for me, draws so many realizations out. And it's fantastic. And you can totally feel your energy moving in your spine. And it's fixed, tight, pinched problem areas for me to release instead of constantly going for toned.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting thing.
It's a really difficult thing for a lot of people.
To let go.
To do yin, because it's not enough.
Oh, it's way enough. What's not enough is people don't let you hold a stretch long enough in a regular yoga class.
So a lot of people find it very challenging because they like that constant movement, transition into the next position, whereas yin, you can be in the position for, up to 5 minutes. And really, as you say, it's more a journey of how you're feeling inside, your sensations, how you're responding to those positions. But for those who are drivers and those who are go, go, go and constantly, on the move, yin can be an extremely challenging practice.
I love it, and it's like
it's
what
great that you do.
Well, it came in, I think, at the point in where I'm going when it was really necessary, and I was open enough to hear it. If you had suggested yin to me 2 years ago, it would have been very challenging.
Yeah.
Which brings me to consider. I've been reading a lot and in my own personal therapy sessions, attachment theory. This is a phrase. It's becoming a little bit more in the vernacular, I think, but it could be because I'm in a bubble of people who like to talk about things like this. Yeah. So let's talk about attachment theory and how maybe yoga can help with that. And what is it? How does it play out? What are we all struggling with? And how does yoga help us?
So attachment is essentially the drive for closeness to others. And that can be, it's both physical and an emotional need. And it's a social and emotional need. So essentially when we're born, we are babies and we can coo and we can cry. And this is a direct call for a close attention from our caregivers. So the mother's programmed to respond to those coos and the cuteness or the crying, and physiologically connected to respond. And then the way they respond to that child is incredibly powerful for setting them up for their social interactions for the rest of their lives. So a child is a human baby is particularly dependent, fragile, to choose a word badly, useless. And for an extended period of time, much longer than most animals, entirely dependent on their caregivers. And in this period, we need to establish trust. So we look to our caregivers for security, for love, for nurturing. We're basically programmed. Our brains are hardwired to connect, and it's a survival thing. If our caregivers don't find it in themselves to respond to our cues and our cutenesses, we could be left, and that equals death.
Right.
So this is all survival. And hopefully we are given caregivers who provide us with a secure attachment for life. But this is something that we assumed was the case. And the more we look into it, realize that it's not the case, and that many children are raised in families that are not conducive to calm in their earlier years, and that could be for a variety of reasons. So our earliest attachment relationships, and more importantly, the coping styles we develop to maintain them, is the template for how we approach all our significant relationships in life.
Yeah.
Social, familial,
romantic, career.
Correct. So all of those relationships we form will be, in effect, stemming back from the way we were raised in those first few years by our parents.
Well, and authority, I think. How we react to authority would be all up in there as well.
Yeah, most definitely. So, the need to connect doesn't expire. It just continues throughout our whole lives and motivates all the relationships that we choose, that we maintain, that we engage in. And so there's essentially 4 attachment styles. There's secure, there's ambivalent, there's anxious, and there's disorganized. And this will have correlations to the way we were raised in those formative years and how we interact in our relationships as adults.
How many of us do we figure are secure in our attachment style?
It's interesting. I'm back at uni at the moment doing my Masters of Social Work, and we've talked about this, and I think that the lecturer asked the class, and I remember thinking, there's quite a few more secure than I'd imagine after all the recent research I've done. But you can actually jump online. There are attachment relationship quizzes. Now, I'm sure there's some pretty shady ones, but I think there's some really good ones. You can search for them online. And interestingly enough, I thought, I am avoidant in my romantic relationships and have been for quite some time. And I thought maybe when I took the test, I'd fall into that category, having having been through quite a few really challenging relationships. But because my mum was so great, even though ever since I kind of left her wing, so to speak, I've been finding myself in these appalling relationships. The fact that my mum provided me with a secure attachment style as a child has lasted with me forever. So I still come up, even though I've got such challenges in certain relationships, I still come under secure.
And so it really does, it depends on what your relationship is with your family of origin.
It does, yeah.
And so can we change our attachment styles?
We can work on it. I think, there's a lot to say about simply understanding. I think a big part of my journey was reading and learning and making sense of myself from simply by, saying, so for example, a big part of the way I didn't like to be in my former life was that I was incredibly reactive. I would jumpy and I would I'd react, and I could be quite judgmental and quick to defend, and then take a few breaths and I'd be like, oh my God, what have I done? So you're not really in charge of, or you're not fully able to comprehend the consequences to your behaviors. And when I learned that was because my brain had been changed due to prolonged stress, just knowing that changed me.
Yes, awareness is key.
Yes.
There's an acronym that I probably mentioned on the show before, but I'll mention to you that I use, and anybody who works in change or project management will be familiar with this, and it's called ADKAR. I use it for stakeholder assessment. Where are you as relates to this change? Do you need awareness?
Yeah.
Do you need desire? Do you need knowledge? Do you need the ability? Or do we need to reinforce what the benefits are so you can get back on track?
Right.
Okay, and so this is the journey of where I just use it, like I say, for assessing where a stakeholder is and what information they need to progress toward accepting the change. And awareness is key to anything.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you need to be aware that your alcohol consumption is impeding your progress in your family, at work, etc. Right? And so you put that down perhaps. But if you don't become aware, so now what I'm understanding is, so the attachment theory is from your family of origin, and regardless of what happens, you essentially maintain that attachment theory your whole life. However, with the awareness that is provided by getting inside that window of tolerance, using these channels of energetic healing, yoga, somatic, talk therapy.
Absolutely.
Then we can give an impression of someone
Certainly.
who's got a secure attachment theory.
And I think we have to differentiate yoga and somatic-based trauma-informed yoga, or we could just call it trauma-informed yoga. That's an easy way of labeling it. Somatic-based trauma-informed yoga is not about pick up your right foot and put it next to your left hand and peel open and touch your toes. There's nothing to do with that. It's not about strength or flexibility. It's about befriending your inner sensations. So a large part of that is also to do with your connection to the facilitator. So essentially attachment related issues are interpersonal issues, right? Someone hasn't treated you the way they should have. You have not left your childhood with a secure base.
Right.
You look out to the world and you expect problems, fear, the insecurity. There's no safe baseline. So you need to recreate trust within individuals. So a large part of somatic-based trauma-informed yoga is connection to the others in your class, allowing yourself to experience your sensations in a group, discuss them, and creating new relationships that are safe. And in doing so, begin to trust the world a little bit again.
This is huge. And touching on trust, that's, if we're looking at the politics in the United States at the moment, and how can you look away, really, right? It's just like that car crash. But, I'm obviously very interested because that's my country of origin, and the impacts ripple worldwide from decisions that are made there still. We'll see how that goes as we go forward. But it's no longer about this person's policies and this other person's plans. Now it's the trust has been eroded so much that we just think everyone's lying. And so that's a huge thing. It seems like the entire globe needs to take a look at attachment theory.
Yeah.
And maybe, and then we have to have a wider conversation about trust. And good luck to us, because the media is part of the challenge. So I've really diverged a bit away from our conversation with that, but I'm keenly aware that trust globally is eroding. And so it does come down to grassroots, right? We need to do it on a one-to-one basis.
Yeah.
And then, as you mentioned, you're raising your vibration. When
Correct.
you got happier, people came to you.
Yeah.
You weren't putting out any effort. You'd done the effort yourself. And then that attracts people to you. So on that,
I think I avoided the question entirely. I think it was about self-study. And
how did you do that? I have another question, but yeah, how did you manage to do the self-study
well,
and keep yourself
self-study
motivated?
is part of the 8-limb path of yoga. So when you kind of come into yoga, you think it's all about touching your toes and down dogging. It's not really. That's part of it. And there is an 8-limb path of yoga, and that really is what they consider the 8-limb path to enlightenment. Now, I don't expect to be enlightened in this lifetime. So I really consider it the 8-limb path to happiness.
Okay.
Yeah.
How are we defining happiness?
Well, that's a very tricky question. So I think you're right. It's probably not the right word to use, but to contentment, to ease as opposed to dis-ease.
Surrender?
And look, it starts with the yamas and the niyamas, which I'm happy to discuss with you if you'd like, which is sort of a code of practice, a code of ethics, if you'd like, a way to be, a way to treat yourself and to behave towards others. And then we go from there into asana, which is the actual positions that we make with our body. Then we go into pranayama, all the way up to meditation, to samadhi, which is enlightenment.
Oh, I'm almost there.
Go, girl, go. Send me a postcard and an invite. So we start at the base, which is the yamas and the niyamas, and they are this. Yamas are do unto others, and the niyamas
Sounds
are
delicious.
do unto you. Yum, yum. And one of those is, look, it's things like non-violence, non-stealing, generosity, balance, non-grasping. So you can look at all that and think, great. And, they're an overarching way or system to foster compassion throughout the whole world, right? They're a wonderful way to live by. But I think you have to pick them and then create your own meaning around them to make them meaningful. So that's up to the individual interpretation of them. So for me, non-violence, I've never been one to go around throwing punches. So that's a given.
Tick.
But for me, it's more about, going back to not eating meat, because that doesn't sit well with me. It makes me so guilt-ridden. And that's just for me, right? I'm not suggesting that the rest of the world do it. And non-violence in terms of choosing your words carefully, being aware that your words have great power to inflict pain, potentially, and monitoring that. And even more importantly, potentially, is monitoring the self-talk. So non-violence means being kind to everyone.
Including yourself.
I
forget about that one.
I think we all do. And this is what I try and
Some
remember
people
everyone.
don't.
It's like, I've been so good to everyone. It's like, but have you been good to yourself lately?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that many of us can say yes to that. Part of my problem was I was just the loop of negative self-talk. And you have to catch yourself in that.
You sure
and
do.
That's a really challenging thing. You've got to catch yourself and go, whoa, okay. Firstly, I recognize that this is happening in my mind. Is this really how I should treat myself? And a nice way to think of it is like, would I treat my bestie like that? Hell no. Or would I treat a stranger like that? Hell no.
Or if someone were doing this to me and it wasn't myself, how would I react to them?
Oh, yeah.
Right? Would I like that person? Would I let them in my kitchen and give them food?
Or give them a room in the house of your mind. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think, a big part of it is spinning things around But back to the yamas and niyamas. So that's just my interpretation of one of them. You need to take them and make meaning from them in your own individual way to apply them to your life so that you're still striving for contentment. As I said, doing the wrong thing actually gives you guilt, shame, and anxiety. So for example, I go down the street and I nick a banana, right? Not the end of the world, but I'm probably going to feel anxious about it. Mm-hmm. And that you cannot attain contentment, and definitely not enlightenment, if you're anxious, especially if you're inflicting the anxiety upon yourself. Mm-hmm. So really, it kind of just makes sense. And for me, one of the niyamas is svadhyaya, and that is self-study. And that's the key for me to check in, really, and say, hold on, where you at in there, girl? Like, what are your thoughts? Are you being kind to yourself? And sometimes it's like, no. And then I have to really, have a stern word with myself about the stern words I'm giving to myself.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, you're getting back to that attachment theory. How were we spoken to as children?
Yeah.
And I know that that's very key in my story, right? How was I spoken to? What were the expectations? What were the boundaries? And that's what I've been putting aside and needing to build a different construct for myself, create an attachment theory as I go forward that works for me. And it could be a blend of those four that you mentioned, because in some cases I'm quite secure and I can recognize when that's going on. And then in others, I am incredibly avoidant because the pain that's shown up in that area over these many years has proven to me that it's not a safe space.
Sure.
And so there's if we're mindful and we're tuned into the feeling in our body, then we are able to have that awareness in the moment. And then we look at our desire. What do we desire from this moment? Is it smart to avoid this?
Yeah. Because
it ticks all these boxes from before. So, your body's telling you run away for a good reason. Mm. Or is your body telling you run away for the reason that it looks like and smells like something from before, but actually if you dig a little deeper, it isn't. And so it's a habit.
So there's a pause, and this is my kind of quote of the week, of the month that I'm obsessed with at the moment. It's Gabor Mate. And he says that human freedom involves our capacity to pause between stimulus and response. And in that pause, to choose the one response towards which we throw our weight. Trauma, and I'd like to add here to just top that Gabor Mate, excessive stress, in my belief. So trauma or excessive stress robs us of that freedom.
Yes.
And that's what it is. And so that and that's where I was, locked in a cycle of reactivity, not able to pause, following the stimulus, consider just for those few nanoseconds what I really want to say or do here, and then follow through. I think it's just so this quote has just kind of taken up my brain space for a few weeks. I think it's perfect.
Yes, and in that space, when you're deciding, it goes back to what's your ultimate goal with that, if you're surrendering, if we're seeking happiness, contentment, all of those things, and then we're pausing and we go, what my response can aid my goal. And
Absolutely.
I must think about what response is going to get me to that contentment or happiness space. Yes. And it's not about, because there's so many times, the person snaked the car space from you. and you have every right to jump out and wonder at them, how dare they? But really, what is this serving? You're not going to teach them anything because you're angry and you lost and they won and they're laughing. So they already did that move. It's over, right? So saying anything to them is not for them. It's for you.
Yeah.
And is it for you? It's really not doing anything toward reaching contentment.
Correct.
So you'd be better to find a further away parking space and breathe for 3 minutes before going into the store.
Yeah. So, and I think we come back there to, to the window of tolerance, which you mentioned in several of your articles. And I think, that's kind of the goal. It's like, how do we manage our demands and our resources while maintaining our position within the window?
Well, being in the window happens because we take all the effort around it, right? We do our meditation, we have our downtime, we do the exercise, different kinds of exercise for the body and the mind and the feelings. If we're doing those things and we incorporate them, we weave them through, always on our platter, every day, then we're kind of in our window and we're going to get stressed. Something's going to come at us that's unforeseen. But because we've been doing all this stuff, we are able to access our tools, and our strategies because we didn't fly off the handle.
That's right.
Now, you talked about your life as a square in a jobby job, flying planes or something. I don't know what you were doing, but it's so different to the woman I know now. And so I'm guessing that your overall approach in life is totally different now. So if you could define what it used to be as compared to what it is now, I mean, did your values shift?
Well, absolutely, because I determined to prioritize my own wellness and mental health. So
what was the priority before?
It's just survival, I think, Elizabeth. I was just locked into that fight or flight, and it was survival. There was no way I thought I could leave the job that I was in and be okay. Single mum, very little support from the children's father. And I sort of came to the point, I was like, this is what I have to do to survive. And I'd really, in a way, given up on myself. I was only staying in that space because I had children who were dependent. I was like, well, I just have to provide, and they need to have a certain, level of a certain level of, of ease in their life,
safety,
and it's my sole responsibility to provide that, and I have to do whatever that takes in order for that to eventuate. And it was making me really sick. So, I had to drop out. I had to, and find something new. And then I realized that when your business is about in time, the actual, if I'm doing a healing or if I'm facilitating a yoga class, I'm in the zone. I am therefore need less time to find for me to place myself in that space of calm because I get it from my job.
Nice.
No.
Talk about a life hack. Go, Shelley. So the prioritization of your values has changed.
I still prioritize my children, and that's why my business is small. I can't teach classes all day Saturday because that's my time with my kids, and I'm not going to sacrifice that. This is a chapter, and they will not be so dependent on me forever. But for whilst I'm in that period of their prolonged dependence,
yes,
they are my priority. They're not my number one. But following that and closely second is my own health and well-being. And because I was in such a dark place, to come so far and to be able to look back with perspective, there's still a part of me that's quite fearful of that space. And I don't ever want to go back there.
No.
Never.
I don't recognize the woman that you were describing. So if that helps you. One other thing, you made a massive transformation, right? You were wearing the high heels and the pencil skirt, and you were taking names and all that stuff that we all get sucked into. I know I was there too. And then you've shifted over here to a very, very different way of earning your crust. And I'm wondering, you told a story about kind of talking to your family and getting not a great reaction, maybe not super welcoming. And then there would be that moment when you come out of the closet sort of on social media, right?
Yeah.
And tell me how that experience went.
It was nerve-wracking. I waited a year. So I started sort of posting, yoga-y stuff and a bit of healing stuff. And I thought people must be thinking, gosh, she's just really, like, someone said to me, I like how you've reinvented yourself. And I was
Thank you.
Oh, that's interesting. Reinvented. Did I reinvent myself? And I thought, no, I didn't. I just remembered myself. As a young person, I was very I was into meditation and crystal healing and spirituality, and I lost that path. So in a way, I feel like I've just gone back to my childhood, which is a kind of nice place to be. And initially I actually did. I pulled out stuff from boxes from my childhood and surrounded myself with them, like little pink fairies sitting on a quartz crystal. And I was like, yes, 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 this is what I want in my life, in my room, next to my bed now. And, coming from a house where I prioritized the minimal, and I liked my elaborately decorated but minimal house, and I wouldn't have dreamt about having a crystal scattered over there. That would have...
Tchotchkes.
No tchotchkes.
Exactly.
I said no to tchotchkes. My whole house is full of tchotchkes now. I just love that word.
It's a good one.
But I had to bring it all back. But look, back to Facebook. So I waited a year because there was no way I had the vocabulary or the knowledge to speak about it prior to that. I couldn't have gone up. A part of me would have liked to have the next day go, guess what? I spoke to the moon last night and now I know everything's real and this and this. And everyone just thought I was insane. I didn't have the background.
There's still a risk.
I'm taking the risk. The risk has already been taken. So I waited a year. I formulated what I thought I needed to say. I kind of thought I'd write it and then realized no one would read it. It was too long. So I filmed it and I posted it. And it felt really scary. I know when I pressed, the button, I got the shakes straight away. But I instantly also recognized a feeling of stepping out of a box. Like I felt I could feel myself, like my legs stretching over the big box and stepping right out. And like, there's nothing you've got on me now. Like, yes. I've stepped out of conformity. I've elected to do this. I've thought about this. I've taken it. This is not a reaction. This is a well thought out part of my future, part of me claiming who I truly want to be, living with authenticity and being really brave enough to say, this is how I feel. This is what I believe. And I prefaced it with, many of you are going to think I'm wacky. This is not for everyone. And I'm comfortable with that.
That's what it is. And the authenticity piece, that's been bubbling up for the last decade with a lot of different people in a lot of different spots. And I think it's turning into a big fat wave, honestly. And if we look with those eyes, then we will see the authentic nature revealing itself in many different spaces. And I'm excited. And I'm really, really happy that I'm reminded of this image. It's a little video of a fish in a tiny sort of basin in the sand of water, and it's wiggling, and it's wiggling, and it's wiggling, and it finally gets out and it's in the lake. And it goes and it's like, oh, but while it was in that little puddle, it thought that was the whole world. Yeah. And it was struggling. Mm-hmm. And then it gets out and it goes swimming, and it must feel so much better, which is what you just described. Yeah. Which is fantastic. I got one more thing. You shared a quote that's going in your mind right now, but I'm going to ask you anyway, if you've got a motivational quote or a word that you return to.
Look, I think with all my healing and all my yoga, it comes back to a quote from the Bhagavad Gita. And, I was teaching facilitating trauma-informed yoga at the St. Kilda Mission in the women's house. And one of the women said to me, I wasn't sure if I should come because, I'm very Christian and I don't want to be pulled into Hinduism. And I thought, wow, that's so interesting, because everything that I've taken from yoga is not really about religion or so much about movement. It's this one quote, and it's, yoga is the journey of the self, through the self, and to the self. And I think if we're to shift and transform, one has to embark on that journey first. And that is in everything, in all of my healing. We're trying to surrender, to let go, to tap into our parasympathetic nervous system so that we can let go of all the shit that's keeping us so tight and contracted, and let it go so that we can find enough space to follow the path through our body into our inner self, back to our souls, which a lot of us have disconnected from. And this requires a commitment to self. We've got to change ourselves first. As you said, we've got to lift our own vibration. If we can change our personal frequency, our frequency will manifest out to the rest of the world, and we can help everyone heal. If I was to say anything to end this podcast about transformation, Elizabeth, is that life is kind of like a story. We have a book to write. Don't be afraid to enter into a new chapter. Authenticity is being the true author, the authority of one's own life. And no one wants to look back and go, oh, that book was boring. Each chapter was the same. We've got to take risks and be brave. And in doing so, begin that journey to ourselves. And when we journey to ourselves, it's imperative that we understand to find the real us, we have to have created calm, ease. And so, finding moments in this fast-paced, consumer-based, competitive world is the key. In time is the key. It would be amazing if we had bosses who could implement that into the daily way of life, if we were almost forced into it, because they recognise that maybe this will help you hit your KPIs, and I bet you for a fact it does.
Absolutely. That is the trick. It's not convincing leadership that healthy people are happier. That's not what's going to convince the pragmatists.
No, they need to know that well-being will equal performance enhancement.
That's exactly right. We are shorting ourselves on innovation, full stop, because we are unhealthy. We can't be innovative if we're stuck. So unclench is the message of today's.
Absolutely.
Right? Find yourself, find your way back to yourself. And if it requires a conversation with the moon, so
take it and listen to the moon.
Thank you, Shelley.
Thank you for having me, Elizabeth.
Pleasure.
It's been wonderful.
Excellent. Have a great day.